good afternoon. It's good to be here with you. Despite, I hope you didn't buy tickets for this because there's no way I could live up to Carlos's introduction. But what I want to do in a short period of time is to sort of take you through what we've learned about innovation. And when he said, I'm the professor of innovation management at IMD, there's probably 4 or 5 of us. Charles is one of them. You've met him earlier this morning. And there's a group of us who do this. Certainly not the only one. We have a relationship with MIT that's lasted for 12 years. I've been part of that from the beginning. We've done about 25 programs together on innovation. And unusual for us, we've listened. So rather than just broadcast, we've tried to pay attention to what people in the room have been saying to us about innovation. So what I'm going to share with you largely comes out of that experience. And it's very generalized because of the nature of the time period and the like, but we can talk about anything you like. I've changed the title. It's not just harnessing, it's unleashing. And I think that's part of what has to happen in the future. It has to be not only keeping it under control, but sort of letting it go as well. If we talk about the new realities, from my perspective, the new realities are quite profound, and they have to do with the way in which we think about innovation and its relationship to the way we think about the rest of the organization. So the biggest thing is you can't escape change anymore. It's ubiquitous and incessant. It never goes away. It's no longer occasional or episodic, so it changes the way we think about how you make managerial choices. This morning, somebody talked about culture being important. For me, culture is the outcome of managerial choices. Think about initiative, managerial choices. We've traditionally made these choices with a different set of assumptions about the world. And those assumptions now are under attack. So the way we think about almost everything is caught up with this innovation ethos. It's in every part of our business. But one of the big things that will be implicit in what I'm saying is that everybody then becomes a potential innovator. So normally I would walk into a group like this and say, how many of you have an innovation responsibility? My sense is in this room, that's an obvious question. But in most of the rooms I'm in, less than 25% of the hands go up. That's out of touch. We need more people to take on more innovative responsibility. It's not just the technology guys, it's everybody now. And that's a big shift, and many people are not prepared to make that shift. So it also changes the way we lead, and we'll get into that in a second, certainly for what we're talking about. How many of you are familiar with this? Porter's 5 Forces. So this is the way we start an MBA program. On the first day, the first morning of the first day, this comes up. It's a map of how you think about the world. It tells you what your industry looks like. It's an industry map. We hope that as people make choices, they think about the map. What's the terrain look like? To be honest with you, when I get on a plane, I know this is old-fashioned, but I sort of hope the pilot has looked at a map, right? I hope a manager looks at the map. Before we start making initiatives, before we start building partnerships, before we start identifying customer segments, my hope is that they look at some sense of what's the field look like. This is what we've traditionally done, okay? It doesn't answer any questions. It sets up choices that you make. You'll notice that change is down here, primarily on the periphery in terms of the threat of substitutes. It used to be that you could say to people, with luck, you'll never have to deal with that arrow because, it hasn't happened in a long time. Those days are over. I mean, you're sitting in a building that is at the center of the slowest industry in the universe. Thank God, right? But those days are over for us as well. We look around and we see change everywhere. And it needs to change the way we think. For those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about, let me just give you a quick example. I was in Tokyo a couple weeks ago with one of the big 3 Japanese automobile manufacturers. We had the top 15 people in the company, minus the CEO, and we were doing a workshop to think about strategic choices. So what do? First day, break them up into groups, warm them up, okay, get them going. So I used this, and I said, let's do a Porter analysis of, it was easy. Everybody knows the industry. It's the other Japanese companies, it's the Germans, it's what's left of Detroit. That's right in here. Everybody sort of knows the customers, right? We sort of have a sense of who they are. We've been working with them for a long time. Everybody knows the supply chains. The supply chains are captives. We know them, they're ours. We sort of know the role of brands and distribution in terms of keeping other people out. Then we get to the substitutes, okay? Usually that's easy. We just move on. The first group stood up and said, so there's about 5 people in each group. First group stood up and said, we're worried about electric vehicles. And frankly, we're worried about Tesla. Okay? We're worried about electric vehicles because we don't do electric vehicles. We have a couple of experiments, but they're very small. They're not what we do. We don't have a supply chain. We don't make batteries. We don't have places to recharge. We don't do any of that stuff, So we're worried about electric vehicles could change our business. Not 100%, but how much does it have to change to hurt? And then they said, and we're afraid of Elon Musk because he's not one of us. And that doesn't mean being Japanese, right? That means he doesn't come out of the automobile industry. In fact, they said he could make a big mistake and we'd all pay for it, okay? And he'd walk away. So that was, that gets your attention. The second guy, the second team, stood up. Now I have to tell you, early in the morning I walked over to this room with the head of R&D. It's early morning Tokyo, before 7 o'clock. It's still pretty quiet. We get to a red light. There's a Lamborghini at the red light. What does a Lamborghini do? Whoom, whoom, whoom. Right? The guy is just doing that. And so I think the guy next to me, the head of R&D, is going to fall apart. He has his hand on his heart. He says, listen to that, right? He says, this is why I'm in this business. He says, I love that sound. And then he says, just having your hand on the shift, right? You're going through the motions. It's wonderful. There's no other feeling like it in the world, okay? Second group stands up and says, we're afraid of autonomous drive vehicles, hands-off vehicles, okay? We're afraid that people won't be driving their cars any longer. Our core competency to the sense that it exists is in engine design. What if interior design becomes more important, right? What if people face one another instead of all facing forward? It'll change everything in the car. We have no skills in that. And parenthetically, a week ago tomorrow, Elon Musk announced that Tesla was going to bring first generation autonomous drive vehicles to their business next year, right? So this is accelerating beyond their belief. The third group stood up and said, what if nobody buys cars? What if people share cars? So 12% of the US population today does not have a car. That's a big number. What if that was to continue? And what if 2 or 3 of these things happened at the same time? And what industry are you talking about now? And what are your core competencies? So what we're seeing is that this model is really dangerous, okay? We're not going to throw it away, but it's unreliable. It no longer tells us what we need to know. What we need to do is move a way of thinking where change is episodic, where change is continuous rather than episodic, and where we move change from the periphery of our planning to the center of it. Change is ubiquitous and unceasing. So what that means is that if you think about change occurring in generations, we see in every industry, I'm not really in your industry, however you would define it, but I have to believe that we see this in your business as well. We heard some of the things this morning about the role of digitalization in terms of changing the way in which you touch affected communities, to communicate, diagnose. What we'll see, what we've seen in every other industry, is that people who are firms who are successful in one generation almost always are unable to make the jump to the next generation. Okay, why? Because of success, because of the legacy of success. So it's very difficult to make that jump. Almost nobody does it. So it's not impossible, and I think we're now, as we embrace change, we're being able to see ways of doing it easier or at least more successfully. but it's really tough because we go into this period of uncertainty where we know things are happening, but we don't know what. Last week I was with a big European chemical company, and one of the managers for business units said, "We have no idea what's happening, and our customers don't either." Okay, and that's where you go into the future. And you know, think about the smartphones you have in your pocket. You take them for granted now, right? But remember when you got your first one? Remember how surprised you were? Mine was an HTC. I couldn't believe how big the screen was. Couldn't believe I touched it. It did things like that. You know, Nokia was surprised. Customers were surprised. These guys came out of nowhere with new ideas. Nokia was in denial, tried to do the same thing over and over again, and it was lost. And not only was Nokia lost, incidentally, but so was Motorola, and so was Sony Ericsson, because they were benchmarking against each other as the industry incumbents. So we go through these periods of change where there's great turbulence and they're accelerating. And as they accelerate, you need to think about where are you, because you want to manage differently. When you're in the middle of this thing, the management mentality ought to be quite different than when you're in the periods of turbulence, whether you're a disruptor or a disruptee. You need to be thinking differently. One of the things you need to be thinking about is we're probably very good in managing steady state, but how good are we in trying to predict the unknown, right? If we can't even tell what industry we're in, how good is your forecasting capabilities? Not very reliable, I think. You know, the other thing that's quite interesting about this, we talk about Kodak and Nokia are the poster boys for this sort of thing, right? And Kodak, we talk about Kodak, the Kodak moments. I hear people use that term anymore. It took Kodak 34 years to die. You opened up the newspaper, sort of like BlackBerry, only BlackBerry was quicker. You open up the newspaper every day and say, what's wrong with those guys? Why can't they figure it out? And yet they would say nobody knew the imaging industry better than they did. They were in every part of that industry, and they were successful for almost 100 years. But they couldn't bring themselves to change. Change is tough, right? The innovation isn't as difficult as the change in response to it. And you're in a business where change is everywhere, right? I mean, I just read the newspapers, watch the TV every day. It's accelerating, and Ebola is really, in a sense, a great case study for how this is happening, and how it has gotten out of hand, despite the fact that we all sort of knew it. I had a conversation with somebody this morning about the coming water crisis in India and China. We all know it. We're sitting here, we all know it. You want to bet it's not a catastrophe when it happens? It will be, right? Because change is so hard to make. So what do we know about this from our perspective, a business perspective, not your perspective? And this is not the solution, but my hope is that there are some lessons, some analogies, right? First is we need to get more out of human talent rather than less. So week after week after week after week, myself, Carlos, Charles, Maury, we're in rooms like this with smart, energetic, creative people. And you know what? We admire the HR people who hire them. They hire great people. The organizations turn those great people into average performers, right? And they do it very fast. You want to know, that's a core competency of complex modern organization, the ability to diminish talent rather than enlarge it. We need to think about new types of organizations. So innovation is not just about technology, it's about the way we work together. I'm at the moment looking at two organizations, one in life sciences, material sciences, the other in making refrigerators, who are trying to move from a traditional organization style to a platform so that they can take advantage of their scale. I mean, the refrigerator company is 80,000 people. So they can take advantage of their scale and still free up people to be entrepreneurs in a commodity industry where margins are thin, and in a society, they're Chinese, where the idea of entrepreneurs has been conflicted over the past few years. But they're trying to do that because that's the only hope they have. Their ultimate asset is in the knowledge of their people. You know, but unless they can unleash that knowledge, it's of no value. So organizational innovation is important. this same company, so part of the problem that, you know, the Kodaks and Nokias of the world have had, BlackBerry for sure, right? They lost 95% of their market cap, and their new CEO said, everything's under control, right? How can you believe that? So one of the things I think we need to think about is how do we make change? You know, we hear people say, CEOs come into rooms like this and they say to their team, fellas, if we can get past this big change, then I promise you, it'll be easier. That's not true, right? They're lying, right? It's not ever going to get easier. So when I talk about the refrigerator company I talk about is Haier, and when I talk about them, one of the things, you go to their factories, and I really believe they have encouraged the people on the shop floor to think that change is natural, that it's going to get bigger. So these are drawings. This is from somebody in the refrigerator products department, equipment. These are all over the place, you know? And I think one of the things that they're doing is they're reminding people, they're illustrations of a lot of things they try to do, but they remind people that we're in this business for the long term and we're going to change and change and change and change. And, you know, it's part of what we do, rather than something to be avoided or be afraid of. The other thing they've done is they've invited more people in. So in most companies, these people would never participate in this conversation. We know more minds are better than fewer, more different minds are better than more of the same. And they're inviting these people in. The other thing we know is that when you're in this period of turbulence, you need to manage different. So if you go to our bookstore, which is conveniently right next door, and buy any book on management, I would suggest a few, but any book on management, almost inevitably the message is hire for attitudes. Did I just do that? Hire for attitudes. I didn't. Train for skills. Because you got to get up in the morning, and you got to go to work, and you got to be excited about it, and attitudes make a difference. That only holds in the middle. Because when you're in these periods of turbulence, whether you're a disruptor or a disruptee, you need the skills. In those cases, you need to hire for skills and figure out how to deal with the attitudes. Not always and not forever, but you need the skills, and the skills are tough. You know, because people with skills come with attitudes. So we need to think about how to do it. Do it sooner rather than earlier, right? So every industry, think about those S-curves, every industry goes through a period where the incumbent leaders first have great success, somebody does, and then a decline. Where do you want to change, right? You want to change over here. Because resources are abundant and people feel good about themselves. We never see those people, okay? We never see those people. We see people over here where resources are scarce and people are afraid. But really great change organizations change earlier rather than later. It's easier to do, right? So that company Haier has basically reinvented itself 3 times, I think, now in the 4th time, on their own over a 35-year period. And it makes it easier to do rather than later. Why fight yourself? I also think radical change should be built on the familiar. So in our language, we only draw 2x2s. I don't know if you've noticed that yet. In our language, you go from existing to new. Existing markets, existing competencies, right? And of course, everybody wants to go from existing to new. That's a mistake. Okay? That's a mistake because what you're doing is you're cutting off all the security of, you're asking the employees and the customers to some extent to take a huge leap based on things you don't know. Far better to try to figure out how do you take fear and uncertainty out of the business by making big leaps on the basis of the familiar and getting rid of that. So one of the things you need to do, I think, is to think about not only what do you change, but what do you keep. This came home to me in an interesting way. This is my son, and he's been working in Guinea as a critical care physician with Ebola patients, scared to death. me as well, right? So he stayed with me before because he was there with OMS, and he stayed with me before he went to Guinea, and the fear was contagious. It was unbelievable. His fear, my fear, the whole idea of going into that. Once he got to Guinea, the thing that was so interesting was he was working with MSF, and the thing that was so interesting was that they have routines and processes for putting on your suit and more rigorously taking your suit off. And it's not the buddy system, it's a full-time guy standing there making sure you follow the protocols, because that's the most dangerous moment perhaps of your life. And I asked him about that, and he said, once you were into those routines, the fear subsided. Okay, didn't go away, but it subsided, so you could put your mind on other things. That's exactly what we see with asking people to make change in big organizations. If you can put some routines and protocols into place and be insanely unreasonable about following them, you have a chance of making big change. And coherence and consistency are necessary. If you don't have these processes, if you don't have some secure base that you can put your hand on, you're asking people to absorb all the change on their own, including, for example, different PPEs, no consistency in any of this sorts of stuff. So when you go out and you look at what's happening in the field, you see how difficult it is to do this right, because everybody's doing it differently and everybody's embracing change rather than embracing stability. You want to do both. But if you do both, you have to remember routines are not enough to learn. So if you do the same thing over and over again, you can't provoke the future. You need to provoke the unknown in here to be able to figure out what to do. And that means experimentation, prototyping, building agile organizations, not everywhere, but pieces of it, and agile people to be able to test what works and what doesn't work. When we go into the unknown, it's only experimentation that gets us answer. So this is the end game, right? I'm now into my last minute or two. Okay, I want to 5 things I want to show you. Innovation ought to be easier than we make it. First of all, we ought to liberate people. It's the ultimate expression of our creativity. First of all, you're never going to get it right, okay? Second of all, somebody's already done it anyway. Third of all, it doesn't have to be new to the world. Remember what Carlos said earlier. And fourth of all, you can't do it by yourself. So with these 4 rules in mind, I'm going to explain them to you in a minute. For these 4 rules in mind, it ought to be easy to do this, right? How can you go wrong? So you're never going to get it right. Wrong and fast is better than perfect and forever, as long as you learn from it and can adjust organizationally. So this was the first mouse, right? Nobody would buy it, but the guys who built it, we know some of those people, learned so much by, rather than dealing in the abstract, by having something tangible that people could respond to. Test. And you know what? It costs nothing to make that. So if it's completely a bad idea, we haven't lost time or money. Second is, somebody's already done it anyway, right? There are people who are doing the same sorts of things you're doing somewhere else. You can see it in your own organizations. There are people who engage with their client base more effectively than you do. You all have favorite restaurants, favorite airports, favorite airlines, favorite schools, favorite this and favorite that. All those people are in different industries, but they're struggling with client engagement, with organizational culture, with career development. You can learn from them. Better to learn from them outside the industry than in the industry, because when you benchmark against each other, you can all go over the cliff at the same time. Third is, doesn't have to be new to the world. So, how many of you have one of these, or had one of these? Right? Wonderful, right? And it was the scroll wheel that made this so great. The ability to just move your finger and change your menu and carry an umbrella and have a briefcase in there. That scroll wheel, this product came out in 2001, thereabouts. That scroll wheel came out in 1983 on an HP calculator. And the Apple took it and put it in here. There's nothing new in this product. 8 months to build this from scratch with no idea to start with, and they changed the world. Okay, so it can be done if you don't try to do it new to the world every time. Third thing is, so Picasso, good artist copy, great artist steal. Fourth thing is, you can't do it by yourself. You need more and different partners rather than more of the same. You are all in, we're all in a value chain. It may be where the talent comes from, it may be where the funding comes from, it may be the people we work with in the field. We're all in a value chain. You need to be strategic about that value chain. You may inherit one, but you don't have to stick with it. Do you have the right partners going in the future? You only move as fast as your slowest partner. And you're only as imaginative or as daring as your most conservative partner. Partnership is really critical. Nobody does it by themselves anymore when it comes to innovation, okay? Those days are over. That's one of the lessons we've learned big time over the last 10 to 12 years in this Driving Strategic Innovation program. You gotta do it with other people. Finally, change leadership. The three things they never tell you about change leadership, okay? The first thing is, great change leaders are immodest. I come from New York. This has been a difficult one for me to deal with, but it's really true, right? Dreams, the bigger your dreams are, the better your chance of accomplishing something. I have a friend who became the dean of a well-known school not so long ago. I called him up and said, "How are you doing?" And he said, every day I'm here, my admiration for the people at Enron grows and grows. So I said, "Enron, they're crooks." He said, "Bill, they're crooks with big dreams." He says, "My faculty are crooks with small dreams," right? So I think what you need is to dream bigger. You're gonna compromise. If you start out with small dreams, you're gonna have minuscule outcomes. Second thing is, you have to be impolite. Polite teams get polite results, right? There are times and places to be polite, but not in that area of turbulence. You don't have time. You need a sense of urgency. And then the fourth thing is, you have to be unreasonable, right? You have to be unreasonable. So what did the Minister of Health in an unknown country say about one of the nurses that contracted Ebola? Yes, we have protocols, but she was going on vacation. How reasonable is it to expect her to abide by those protocols? You have to be unreasonable. So that's my overview. In a nutshell, you can't do much in a short period of time, but I hope it gives you some distillation of what we've learned over time. But thank you. Thank you.